I know what you're thinking. Oh, wow. Another video that talks about Dark Souls on YouTube? No way. But this is different, and I'm not just going to talk about Dark Souls. It's my personal experience, but this is something that applies to a lot of other games. And it's something that, unfortunately, I think will never happen again. Or if it does, it will never happen to the scale that we remember it. I'm talking about community discovery. Now, Dark Souls is, for me, the biggest example to really illustrate my point. It is a modern classic going on 13 years today, and it's very unique in its place and time, because it was released when the internet was already very big and we spent a lot of time on it and talking on it, and forums were buzzing and people would talk about games. But before YouTube became what it is today, and Twitch was a thing, and TikTok. So that places it in a very unique time frame for what I'm going to talk about. Now, as I'm sure you know, because you're watching a video on games on YouTube, Dark Souls is fantastic for many reasons. But for me, and I think that for a lot of people, the sense of discovery, the mystery inherent in progressing through the game is a really big part of what makes it memorable. It's something that I've talked about before, and that I want to talk about much more in depth in the future, which is optional content in games. As budgets keep ballooning, developers don't want to put effort, time, and money into something in a game just so that players never see it. But Dark Souls and all of FromSoft's games don't subscribe to that idea. Instead, they have tons of not just optional content, but content that is easily missable. And the content that is missable is of incredibly high quality, which is all important in making the discovery of it feel special. Something that you will remember for years and years to come. So when discovery and even just progression through a game is such an important part of it, it's not just how you face that challenge, it's how a community does. So I tried searching for these things on the Wayback Machine, and they're not available. So you're going to have to take my word from it, and hopefully somebody else can corroborate this. But I have very fond memories of getting on the hype train for Dark Souls as it was coming into its own, and reviewers were talking about it, and picking it up on launch day. And obviously there was something about Dark Souls, be it its aesthetics or the way it plays, but especially I think in the way it looks, that really made people want to try it. So I was not alone. Dark Souls sold pretty well on launch, but most importantly, when it launched, there were no resources. There were no guides, there were no videos, there was no collection of all the secrets in the game, at least to my knowledge. And the people who were playing it, including myself, we were so in love with the game, with the experience, that we wanted to play it, to progress through it, to discover everything in it. We just really wanted to play this game. But with those roadblocks, the difficulty spikes, and all the secrets that are in it, we rallied around forums. For me back in the day, that was primarily game FAQs. I did go to a couple of other forums, but that is the big one for me. And I distinctly remember the experience of running to my living room, sitting down at my 360, playing Dark Souls, reaching points in the game where I didn't know how to progress, where things were just a little bit too obtuse for me, where I just wasn't sure what to do, or I knew that there had to be a shortcut somewhere, or a bonfire. The game couldn't be this ruthless. And then running to the computer room, pressing F5 on the Xbox 360 Dark Souls forums, and encountering topics, encountering threads of people in very similar situations, always at the top. We were kind of all at the same locations, at the same stopping points, and we would talk about what we had found and would wait. We would try and get through it and keep refreshing to see who found a way to progress. And Dark Souls had this idea at its core, because you do have soapstone signs, you can leave messages for players, tips, or troll them, but it was limited in how much you could really communicate. But they did serve in that very brief period of launch also as flags. You would reach a new area, have your mouth wide open, and if you saw a message on the ground, you knew that somebody had already been there. And you could gauge how many people had been there by the upvotes on the message. But if you came into a location and there was nothing, you felt a special pride of being the first one in the community, at least to your knowledge, that got there, or at least the first to leave the message. And it wasn't a feeling of wanting to spoil things for people. People were very respectful, spoiler tagging things, and mostly giving hints, which would be tremendously influential on my life moving forward to this day. But even if you read the spoiler tags where they more directly explained things, this wasn't image posting. There were no videos. It was just text. So a lot of the surprise, a lot of the impact of reaching those new areas or finding those shortcuts was still preserved. And all of this together leads to a really special experience in my life where not only was I participating in a community of people that were just loving a game, but also to this feeling that was bolstered by the in-game mechanics of playing through it and feeling like I was surrounded. I was doing it at the same time, connected in a sense to all of these people that I was communicating with as we worked together to figure the game out and play through it. And back then, I guess no publications really focused or decided to put a priority on making a guide for Dark Souls. And many reviews of the time mention how the review process for it included many long email chains and chats. And I remember podcasters from the time talking about how those communities formed of all the reviewers in different chats, talking about what they were finding and giving tips to each other and helping each other out to get through the game in time for review. And that same experience was the one that launch players had. There were no spoilers, there were no guides, nobody came out to tell you a game-winning tip. As things were discovered, things would pop up. And that feeling of community discovery just can't really happen again. Today, if a game releases, it often already has guides available for it. But even if it doesn't, the speed of the internet is a very different thing, as well as the way that those messages are communicated. Before, you had to actively seek out information in those forums willingly. Today, algorithms will notice that you are interested in this game, and before you know it, somebody is trying to rush through it on Twitch. The chat is helping him out. They are Googling everything they can to find information on how to solve this obscure puzzle or encounter a specific thing. They tell the streamer, he does it, somebody clips it, it's then uploaded to YouTube and to TikTok, where the algorithms will feed it to you whether you like it or not. And if you want to cut yourself off from all of the information as to not have that experience ruined for you, that's not the point. That's still great, and it's what I tend to do with games. It's the fact that the community experience just doesn't work the same, because there's always going to be people who have already seen in detail how everything works and are willing to tell you. So unless you have a particularly large group of friends that all want to be spoiler-free and talk only to each other while going through a game, this isn't really going to work the same way. Because back then, that very specific moment in time for Dark Souls 1 felt like the biggest video game playground conversation ever. Just tons of people talking in that very playground way of, I'm pretty sure that if we try to do this, it can be done and it'll lead somewhere. And then people testing it out and coming back with their results, and it was special. But it's not unique to Dark Souls at all. And that sense of discovery being so important, and that sense of community discovery being something that really ties people to a game and helps communities form, has been seen in many other places. I think World of Warcraft is a great example of this. It's a massive game with tons of content and tons of secrets, and on release, it took a long time to get through the game and learn everything. So communities were very active in figuring stuff out and talking to each other and having a sense of pride around being the first to find something and telling it to your friends and having it spread. Like you discovered a huge secret and then brought it to the world. And I think it's a big part of the nostalgia that a lot of people feel for those early days of something like World of Warcraft or other MMOs like it. But that doesn't mean that it's exclusive to old games. This last year, I had a very similar experience with Baldur's Gate 3, where there weren't any resources to get through the game, and there were tons of people playing it. It's a very big game with a lot of different options and secrets and loot to find, and tons of different paths that can lead you to different results. So it led to large conversations online of people figuring their way through the game. I distinctly remember Googling many times what were the solutions for certain side quests, and there were no solutions. Nobody knew how to solve them. But there were people asking the question and having theories, and that was fun. It can still happen. It's just that the moment that a solution is found, there's probably going to be a video on it. And I do think that gamers, we chase that high of discovering a game, of being the first to experience something. And it shows. We jump in on launch day into big, massive experiences like MMOs, but even those have been kind of ruined by the need for extensive betas and in-depth coverage of them before release in order to maximize their exposure. We jump into big adventures, and we like to be confused together and make discoveries at the same time. But it keeps getting more and more rare. When I started making videos last year, I put a lot of emphasis into making videos for Tears of the Kingdom, which was a game that I was incredibly excited for, and I knew I was going to play through 100%. So why not make videos as well? But that experience of GameFAQs forums in 2011 really informed me that I wanted to make videos in a very specific way that helped people in a way that didn't ruin their experience. So I made many different, very successful Zelda videos where I didn't tell people what to do. I didn't tell them where to find specific things. At least for the first month, I would give people hints. I would say vague stuff. Like, after you finish your first temple, make sure to go back to the main town and explore thoroughly, because something will have changed that will lead you to something that you'll really like. Or I would just recommend different things to people and say, hey, you should probably start out in this area and don't neglect exploring the map further up than you think, because you're going to encounter some cool stuff. And the reception to those videos was incredibly positive, because that's the sort of stuff people wanted. They didn't want to just be scrolling through their For You page and get stuff straight up spoiled, but they did appreciate getting nudged in the right direction, much like I enjoyed that, and so many people did, back in 2011 on video game forums. And that really taught me that people crave that experience of discovery, and that taking it away from them is something I never want to do. But as times change and the way that we consume media changes, those concepts of community discovery become more and more rare to find. I don't know if I will ever have that same experience that I had with Dark Souls. I don't know if I could ever live an experience like what people tell me about launch World of Warcraft. I know that I can chase pieces of it in situations like Baldur's Gate 3. And while part of me is sad about it, I'm also very thankful to have lived it, and I want that to be remembered, because I think it's an important part of how you design a game as well, if it's designed for these things to happen or not, and about how you launch a game, who you give access to in order to cover it, or what rules you put in place for the coverage. Because it is partially in control by developers, even if they are sometimes slaves to the system and the optimal marketing strategies. And that's why I wanted to leave this video here as a time capsule, talking about something that truly, I guess you just had to be there. So I've been Mugthief. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, if it made you reflect on something, please hit the like button. It helps more than you can imagine in having this video reach more people. If you enjoy videos like these and want to see even longer, more in-depth ones, make sure to subscribe. There's already quite a few up on the channel, and there's more coming up always. And finally, leave a comment with experiences that you've had of this sort, things that these community interactions that stand out to you, in games that are now special to you. I read every single comment, and especially with something as positive, kind of wholesome, it'll brighten my day and probably anybody else who decides to scroll through the comments. So make sure to do that. I really do like the idea of a time capsule of the importance of this concept in games. So contribute to it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you very soon.